I was not born to wear a crown. I did not grow up imagining palaces or parades or my face cast in glass, stained windows. I knew nothing of royal tapestries or bloodlines. What I knew was survival. I knew silence. I knew the art of folding myself into the background so well that people forgot I was in the room, and that was often the safest place to be. They don't speak of the before, of who I was when I had no title, no sigil, no place at any table. But before the silks and the secrets, I was a woman made of bruised prayers and quiet endurance. I belonged to no one, and so I belonged nowhere, until suddenly I was needed, not wanted needed. History has a way of reaching into the shadows and pulling out what it requires in the moment. And I was that necessity. The corridors of power are colder than they look. They don't tell you that in the books. They describe the gowns, the jewels, the coronation. But they leave out the part where you must rehearse every breath, where you learn quickly that speaking too soon is as dangerous as not speaking at all. They say I entered the palace through the grand arches, but truthfully, I stepped into it through the smallest door, the one marked convenience. From the first day, I knew I was not being welcomed, I was being measured. Every word I spoke was weighed, every silence filled in by others with what they feared or hoped. I smiled because I had to. I nodded because it cost less than defiance, and all the while my past, the real one, the one sewn in rougher thread, followed me like a quiet echo down those long marble halls. It's easy to look at portraits and assume peace. To see a composed face and imagine dignity was gifted, not earned. But you cannot paint what a person buries inside themselves. You cannot capture how it feels to sit on a throne and still feel like a visitor in your own life. They gave me a title, yes, but they gave it the way one gives someone a mask to cover, not to reveal. The truth is, I was not ready. But readiness is not a luxury people like me are granted. I had to become who they needed in real time, with every eye watching, with every mistake written down in ink. I could not ask questions. I could not mourn what I left behind. My past had to be tucked neatly away, its pages glued shut, lest someone decide to read them aloud. So I learned to stand still while the world spun. I learned to speak only when it would not draw blood. I learned to swallow the parts of myself that made others uncomfortable. There are those who say I was lucky, that I rose from nothing to become everything, but I know better. I know what it cost. I know the names I had to forget, the stories I could no longer tell, the parts of me that still cry out in the night unanswered. I did not ascend. I was pulled quickly, sharply into a place that did not want me, only what I could offer in the moment. And still I stood, still I smiled, still I played the part they handed me, even when it cut into my hands. Because sometimes survival is not about being chosen. It is about not being allowed to leave, and when the past has been stitched shut, you wear it like an underlayer invisible, but always pressing against your skin. They called me Queen, but they never asked who I was before, and perhaps that was the point. They thought I was quiet because I had nothing to say. But quiet is not the absence of thought. It is often the presence of too much. I watched them all, the ones who smiled with their teeth and sharpened daggers behind their backs, the ones who toasted alliances by night and broke them before morning. The palace was not built for the pure of heart. It was a place of performance, of strategy, of eyes watching eyes watching eyes. So I learned not to speak unless I was spoken to, and even then, only just enough. People say the court is where truth goes to die. That's only half true. It's where truth is dressed up in velvet, perfumed with flattery, and sent into rooms to do damage in silence. I realized early that my words would always be measured against someone else's fear. So instead of speaking, I listened. Every hallway held stories. Every passing servant, every open door, every misplaced sigh carried more weight than any official decree. I learned to walk slower through the corridors, to pause longer near walls, to nod in ways that invited confidence. No one suspects the woman who simply listens. No one fears the one who looks down, who folds her hands just so, who asks about your children while memorizing the names you slip when you think no one hears. They think power comes from titles and seals, but real power is knowing before others do, who is lying, who is faltering, who is hungry for something they haven't earned. That kind of power is invisible, but it moves everything. And it is not won loudly. It is gathered, little by little, like rain in cupped hands. I didn't chase their attention. I made them think they were ignoring me, and in doing so, they showed me all their secrets. The advisor who blinked 3 times when he lied, the lady in waiting who suddenly went silent every time one name was mentioned, the guard whose left hand always twitched before trouble. I stored it all. Names, habits, patterns. I became fluent in silence, fluent in what was not being said. They played their games with their flags and their forged loyalties. They underestimated me because I didn't play loudly. But I wasn't there to win the game they made. I was building a game of my own, and mine didn't require crowns or armies. It only required patience and a memory that did not forgive. There is an art to being invisible in plain sight, to becoming the one people forget to fear. When others reached for daggers, I reached for knowledge. When they celebrated victories, I took note of the wounds they tried to hide. I watched them fall in love with their own schemes, never realizing that while they were playing, I was recording. Every whisper, every betrayal, every shifting alliance, it all passed through me like thread through a needle, and I was stitching a tapestry of truth. I learned that the ones who speak the loudest often understand the least. That fear can be disguised as certainty, and weakness can be hidden in cruelty. I learned that silence isn't submission, it's strategy, and sometimes saying nothing speaks loudest of all. They gave me rooms, but I took walls. They gave me titles, but I took truths, and while they plotted, I remembered, not for revenge, not even for justice. I remembered because someone had to, because in a palace built on vanishing truths, memory was rebellion. And when the walls closed in and the games turned cruel, I knew what they did not, that no secret stays buried forever, not when someone like me is listening. They tell you to smile. They tell you it softens the room. That people will feel safer, that your silence becomes charm instead of suspicion. But in the world I was handed, smiles were currency, and love, if it ever existed, was traded like a secret, given only to be taken back. You learn quickly. Affection isn't something you receive. It's something others use to test your weakness. So I learned to measure. Not just my words, but my breaths, my pauses, the tilt of my head when I listened. Every gesture could be misread, every softness seen as submission, and once they think you're weak, they come closer, not with kindness, but with motive. That's how affection works here. It's never clean. It always wants something in return. When someone reached for my hand, I didn't feel warmth. I felt the questions behind it. What does she know? What does she want? Is she dangerous or is she blind? There is no such thing as innocent touch when the room is full of watchers. Even a shared look across the table can be a risk. So I mastered the art of almost meeting their eyes, almost smiling, almost trusting. Enough to make them wonder, but never enough to hand them anything real. People speak of love as if it's a fire, but in my life it's always been ice, controlled, slow, dangerous when it spreads. If I ever loved, and I did, it was silently. Not because I lacked feeling, but because I knew what it could cost. In this place, the heart is not protected. It is exposed, and if you care too openly, they will use it to undo you. They will find the person you care about most and teach you what it means to be powerless. So I hid my heart in plain sight. I let them think I was untouched, unaffected. I became skilled at giving just enough to keep suspicion at bay, a compliment here, a shared laugh there, but nothing rooted, nothing lasting. Nothing they could steal or twist. There's a difference between being cold and being careful. I chose careful, because the moment you give affection freely, they mark you. They remember who made you laugh, who made you softer, and then they wait. There were moments, I admit, when I wanted to forget all of that, when a gentle word reached me before I could build my wall in time, when someone looked at me not as a queen or a symbol, but as a woman. Those were the most dangerous moments of all, because they reminded me of who I once was, of how it felt to be seen without suspicion. But that feeling, it never lasted, because even the kind ones here wear masks, especially the kind ones, and so I hardened. Slowly, painfully, I turned even tenderness into a calculation. I began to watch not only what I gave, but what I responded to. Did I lean too close when he spoke? Did I pause too long before answering her? Did my voice soften when I shouldn't have let it? You cannot imagine the exhaustion of guarding every thread of who you are, every hour of every day, but that's what this life demands. Affection in this world is not a gift, it's a signal. It tells them where to aim, and I refuse to give them a target. I refuse to let my care become my ruin. That doesn't mean I stopped feeling. It means I became fluent in hiding it. I still feel everything, but I show nothing, because here, love is not something you fall into. It's something you survive. Some women wore their stories in brooches and rings, in the embroidery of their gowns, in the lineage of their sons. I wore mine in ink, quiet, careful ink. I wrote not for attention, but for memory, for the moments I knew would otherwise vanish into silence, because in this world, what is not recorded is denied, and what is denied becomes myth. So I wrote, late at night when the halls had quieted and even the walls seemed less eager to listen. I wrote what I could not say, what would have cost me everything if it had passed my lips. There were no titles in those letters, no rehearsed flattery or political scripts, just truth, sometimes angry, sometimes terrified, sometimes cold, but always mine. I folded each one with hands that knew the weight of consequence. I never signed them. That was the first rule. Names give power, and I had already given enough of mine away. Still, I needed a place to put it all. The betrayals, the watching eyes, the words I'd swallowed for days and weeks until they burned. You see, there is a pain in knowing so much and speaking so little. That kind of pressure finds its release somewhere. For me, it was paper. They think secrets are hidden in locked rooms or whispered in corners. But the most dangerous truths are the ones that live just out of sight, wrapped in silk ribbons, slipped between pages of old books, tucked beneath floorboards. That's where mine lived. I couldn't destroy them. To erase them would be to erase myself, but I couldn't risk them being found either, so I became an archivist of my own silence, a curator of truths too sharp for daylight. There were days I nearly burned them. When fear outweighed faith, when the weight of carrying so much history made me doubt whether it was even worth preserving, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was defiance, maybe it was the stubborn hope that someday someone would need to know what really happened, and not just the version that was painted in oils and passed down through lips trained to lie. I didn't write for justice. I had long stopped believing it would come. I wrote for clarity, for control. In a life where everything else could be taken or twisted, these letters were mine. No advisors had reviewed them. No eyes but mine had seen them. They were unfiltered, and perhaps they were the truest part of me, There were nights when I addressed them to people I had lost, to those who had been silenced before me. I imagined them reading the words I could never say aloud, nodding in the dark, understanding without judgment. Those letters were conversations with ghosts, and in some ways they were the only honest conversations I ever had. I don't know if they'll ever be found. Maybe they'll stay buried forever, hidden in the cracks of a palace that would rather forget. But I wrote them anyway, because not all resistance is loud. Sometimes the most radical act a woman can do is remember, and refuse to let the truth die quietly. I wrote so I wouldn't forget who I was beneath the mask. Beneath the gowns, the roles, the rituals. I wrote so the girl I used to be, the one before all of this, would not be completely erased. Because in a place like this, if you're not careful, even your memories can be rewritten. That is why the ink mattered, that is why I kept going, not because it changed the world, but because it kept me from disappearing inside it. You learn in time that the brightest rooms can hold the darkest intentions. That smiles are not always signs of peace, but veils, disguises, traps set in velvet. The more someone smiles in court, the more I listen, not to their words, but to what they leave out, because that's where the truth always hides. And in my world, it's never the spoken promises that shape outcomes. It's the unspoken warnings woven between lines. I became fluent in those silences, in the way people say one thing while meaning another. The tilt of a head during a toast, the sudden quiet when a name is mentioned, the soft laugh that doesn't quite reach the eyes. That's where the real messages are. Polished manners are the first weapon of any seasoned manipulator, and believe me, this palace was full of them. Some born to power, some clawing toward it, all wearing charm like armor, but the smiles, those were always the first clue. I learned early that the kindest expression often came from the cruelest heart. That a compliment could be the start of your undoing, that a gift, especially one unasked for, rarely came without cost, so I began to catalog them, not just the people, but their smiles, who showed teeth, who tilted their chin upward, who smiled only when others were watching. There's a pattern to deception, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every time I smiled back, I was choosing my battle. Every time I responded with grace, I was protecting something. My position, my knowledge, my future. I never smiled without reason, not once, and when I did, it wasn't just a performance. It was a warning of my own, because by then I had secrets too. Secrets are survival here. You keep them close like knives under your pillow. You build them quietly, thread by thread, until what you hold is more powerful than anything they can use against you. But they're not just to be hoarded. They must be managed, balanced. A secret unguarded is a secret weapon turned inward. That's why I never let mine slip, not even under pressure, not even in grief, especially not in grief. There are things I've never told a soul. Things I've hidden in gestures, in pauses, in the deliberate choice to speak less than I know. And that's the game, isn't it? Not just surviving lies, but outliving them, knowing them better than the ones who spoke them, and carrying enough of your own to never be cornered, because behind every secret there is always a warning. Sometimes it's whispered in a coded letter. Sometimes it's written in how quickly someone changes the subject. Sometimes it's nothing more than the absence of something that should be there, a missing name, an unspoken thank you, a glance that lingers too long on a ring you shouldn't be wearing. I've seen what happens when someone ignores those warnings. I've watched smiles turn into strategy, into silence, into scandal. And I've learned that pretending not to notice is a mistake you only make once. So I never forget a warning, no matter how soft. I file them away like maps, and I walk my path accordingly. Some think this life is about strength. Others think it's about influence, but really it's about memory. Who remembers what, who forgets on purpose, and who knows which secrets to keep until the exact right moment. I never threatened anyone, I never needed to. My presence alone became enough once they realized I remembered everything. That's the thing they never understood. They thought I was smiling out of politeness. They didn't realize I was smiling because I already knew how the story ended. That was never the plan. I never wanted to be remembered like this, etched in whispers, sewn into old songs, turned into something between a warning and a legend. I didn't crave the stories. I didn't write the myths. I just refused to be erased. Because they tried, oh, they tried. They rewrote my decisions before the ink even dried. They softened the moments where I stood firm and dramatized the ones where I stayed silent. They twisted loyalty into vanity and diplomacy into deceit. You'd be surprised how quickly memory turns traitor when power changes hands. And still, I didn't argue. I didn't storm into rooms demanding correction. I let them tell their version, because I had already written mine. Not on parchment, not in declarations. I wrote it in choices, in the alliances I built and the ones I broke for the greater good, in the people I protected, quietly, carefully, when no one was watching. In the secrets I carried so others wouldn't have to. That's the thing about power, it isn't always loud. And legacy, if it's real, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive, and mine did. They remembered others, too, for a time. The ones who glittered louder, who made war for attention, who surrounded themselves with flatterers and believed that applause meant permanence. But power like that burns fast, the kind that comes from fear or spectacle. It never lasts. It consumes its own name, and once it's gone, so are they. I knew better. I didn't need to be loved. I just needed to outlast them. So I gave them nothing to erase, nothing careless, nothing cheap. Every move was deliberate, every silence measured. I let others chase legacy in the open. I built mine in the shadows they left behind. And when their fires burned out, mine was still smolder. In quiet, constant. The truth is, the world forgets loud men far faster than it forgets dangerous women. Especially the kind they never saw coming. That's what I became. A contradiction they couldn't explain, and therefore couldn't destroy. A woman who should have broken, but didn't. Who should have vanished, but wouldn't. Who wasn't supposed to lead, and yet did. And not just for survival, but for something more enduring, for memory. They can remove statues, rewrite texts, but they cannot unlive what I've lived. They cannot go back and undo the outcomes shaped by my decisions. They cannot unmake the version of history that still breathes in the laws I touched, the people I changed, the ones I left standing. And that's what they'll remember. Not the crown, not the title, not even the face. But the consequences, the choices no one expected me to make. The quiet ways I pulled threads until the whole fabric shifted. They'll remember how it felt to underestimate me, how it felt when I smiled without saying a word, how it felt when they realized I had outlived their intentions, because in the end, all stories fade. But some names become architecture, and I built mine to last. They watched, they whispered, they warned, but I endured them all in silence. What they mistook for grace was strategy, and what they tried to bury became the proof I ever lived. I was never just part of the story. I was the chapter they couldn't close.